all fly away together. Into the forever and beautiful sky.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another Backlot Banter movie review. My name is Tucker Hazel, of course. I am joined by my co-host Tanner Dykstra, who is finally ready to face the music. And today we're here to talk about the end of a trilogy, a very important trilogy to both of us, but in particular Tanner Dykstra, which I'm sure we'll get into. This is going to be a meaty, full, rich discussion about Guardians of the Galaxy. Yes, spoiler filled. We'll give a little thoughts up front, but if you want to talk to us about this movie, MCU movies, other movies releasing, I don't know, carrots, if that's what you're into, join our Discord. Got a Discord in the description, and you can also subscribe to the channel, because most of you don't do that. I'm like, what's up with that?
85% of you, for some reason.
Yeesh. Make sure you're part of the elite 15%.
True. That's true.
Also, like this video, because you're gonna like this. Yeah. Tanner,
we have a good discussion.
Did you like this movie?
Tucker, that's a complicated question, because let me take you, the viewer, on a little journey here. And I gotta start back where this trilogy started, back in the year 2014, where 13-year-old Tanner Dykstra saw the trailer for Guardians of the Galaxy for the first time. And it was the first movie that I ever got excited for. Like, I had seen movies in theaters before. I had seen Cars, I had seen Night at the Museum, or whatever. But this is the first one where I, saw this and, of my own volition was like, I am interested in this film. I want to see this. And it got me excited. I watched all the previous Marvel films, and I really credit it as the movie that got me into watching and caring about film.
Sure.
And so, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was shaping up to be a very important film for me. I had a lot of pressure going. I realized after the fact that I had a lot of pressure on myself. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself going into this film. That I was telling myself, I need to care. I need to be affected by this. And it wasn't necessarily that I had expectations for what I wanted to happen. There was just... Yeah. I had expectations for what I was supposed to feel about it, I guess.
Interesting.
And watching it last night, the opening Thursday night showing, I was not really sure what to feel about it. I didn't even give it a rating on Letterboxd after the fact. And for 24 hours... Which
is a dire situation.
It is a dire situation.
It barely ever happened.
And for 24 hours after that, I could not stop thinking about this film and how I feel about it, and why I didn't not even why I didn't like it, why I didn't click with it, what was the disconnect. 24 hours all day today, I could not stop thinking about this film. So without telling anyone, I decided to go watch this film immediately after I was done with class today, and I did, and I love it now. I really do love it now.
Yeah, he sent the Danny DeVito, I get it
exactly
now image.
And I still have issues that I want to talk about, but I do want to, just put as much praise as we can on this film, because I think it is a massive accomplishment for James Gunn, for the entire creative team, for everyone involved. But Tucker, what did you think?
Well, I didn't have that same sort of expectations. Frankly, I don't think I've ever brought that kind of expectation into a movie, even a movie like Avengers Endgame, which is probably still the cinematic achievement of our lifetime, the cinematic event of the entire time that we've been cognizant. Not even a movie that big and that personally resonant to me that I bring that kind of expectation into. But with this film, I was just ready to be brought back to my love of the Guardians, because if you are an Untitled Marvel Project fan and you listen to our reviews of Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of 1. I defend even some of the weird flaws of that movie, like Ronan the Accuser. I'm like, aha, there's a reason for that. But I am not a fan of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I've seen that movie a couple times, and each time I continued to be reaffirmed in my distaste for that film. But I had faith in James Gunn, because he also made, I'd say, easily the best DCEU movie in The Suicide Squad just a couple years ago. And seeing him bounce back and forth between Guardians 1 and 2 being what they were, getting dipping his toes into DC and being able to be a little more violent and wacky and be a little more unrestrained, and then bringing that energy back to Marvel. carrying over some of the friendships that he made from working
Yes.
on the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker into this film. And I think in terms of spectacle and violence and more serious themes, bringing that to Guardians 3, I was wowed when I saw this movie last night. I really want to see it again very soon, which I haven't done since, well, I saw Multiverse of Madness like twice in the first week, but not like out of my own volition, just like because like it was a thing to do. But I actively want to see this movie again because I want to dig for all the things that I feel like I might have missed on a first run, even though it was such a fantastic first watch for me. There's so much to praise about this movie. I think almost all the actors turn in some of their best performances in the entire series, if not some of their best performances of all time. I think this might have the best production design of any MCU movie. It finally returns to quality CGI.
Yes.
They do not skimp on this movie at all. The production is there, the CGI is there, the performances are there, and frankly, I think that this is one of the most emotionally resonant MCU movies that we've gotten in a very long time. For me, harkening back to something like Iron Man 3, which is really about character introspection, this film feels so character-focused. And in the fears and the conflicts that these characters have, it's such a wide cast, but I really think it all hones down into what is on these characters' minds. And I was so enraptured by this, I think, incredibly focused plot that just was a fun time all the way through. I really, really loved Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. James Gunn, you did it.
Yeah, and now we gotta send him off. We gotta ship him off to off into the great horizon of the DCU, and we'll see what he does over there. But this has instilled faith in that for me. But Tucker, let's talk about Guardians 3. And I think a good place to start is Rocket Raccoon. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Because he is he gets the entire subplot of this film. He is a focus of the trailers, and for obvious reason, because Rocket Raccoon has always sort of been like he's always been for sure the most interesting character of the Guardians. I think his background has always been sort of shrouded in mystery, and of course that's what this film is largely concerned with. But also, as people have pointed out, he is like the James Gunn writer insert. He is the most tortured of these characters. He is the most broken, and he is the most like.
Does James Gunn see himself as a tortured and broken individual?
I don't know, maybe, potentially. I mean, he...
Why do you say character insert? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think that, James Gunn is obviously concerned with these ideas of, found family and redemption and second chances.
Sure.
And I think if you look at the whole of his career, he kind of views that his time as Marvel as that. He was a trauma guy, that very off the beaten path, very like offensive sort of comedy sort of stuff, and now he's making the biggest family friendly 4-quadrant films in the world, and he's heading up a cinematic universe. It is like a second chance for this guy who didn't think that he was going to have this, who was like stuck in this sort of grimy, abrasive sort of style of filmmaking. So absolutely, I think that Rocket sort of has that trajectory for him. And Rocket is the focus of this film as well. And it's brilliant. Bradley Cooper has always been turning in great voice performances and does so here again. And Rocket as a character is this encapsulation, the perfect encapsulation of finding yourself, of second chances, of found family, but, and most importantly with Guardians 3, moving on from that. And that's what I think is the most important thing that didn't click with me the first time, is that the Guardians films have always been so much about found family, about, being a broken person and finding a bunch of other broken people and fitting together nicely, filling in the gaps that each other's psyches and emotional states have. But Guardians 3 is interesting, because after 2 films of that, after 2 films of development and a holiday special and appearances in Infinity War and Endgame, our characters, I don't know how much we want to get into here, actually, because this is spoilers.
Yeah, we're doing spoilers now. Movie's great, go fucking watch it.
They split up at the end of this film. Yeah. And throughout the film, on my second watch, I was really looking for notes of that happening throughout the course of the film and not just at the very end. And there is stuff there. Yeah. And I did not give it enough credit there when I watched it the first time. And they split up. Because at the core of it, I think Guardians 3 is about, yes, you have your family, you have your support network that makes you who you are, but at the end of the day, you have to forge your own path as well.
Yeah,
You have to
absolutely.
find your own
Yeah.
way forward. And I think that's really beautiful and really touched me emotionally on the second time for sure. I was tearing up when it was time to say goodbye to the Guardians.
Yeah, and I was also I was really emotionally moved by this film, and I think that the idea of this band of garish characters that are always at each other's throats, especially in that first movie, and you've got remnants of that in the second movie, and then a little bit into Infinity War, having this film be they are comfortable as a group really is a satisfying arc across the course of all the films that they've shown up in. They have this history together, and instead of being abrasive to one another because they don't understand each other, or because they don't have any experience around each other, they instead have they rub up against each other in weird ways because they do know each other, and they know each other's flaws and what causes them to act certain ways, and the way that each of the main characters in this film. There are certainly some characters I want to get into that I think are underserved in this film, but in a ensemble cast, so many of the core characters that we follow here each bring up a interesting point of what it means to be confident in yourself, what it means to grow as a person based on the help that you've received, but to center it back onto yourself at the end of the day so you can continue to explore and find yourself in the future. And that is, as I was sort of trying to explain to you last night, I think that is really the arc that these characters are intended to go on. And obviously it's, it's what paid off over the course of these films, is not to find family and that is it, but to find family, work together, and then work to build yourself off now that you've been sort of healed from the past traumas. And I think nowhere is that more apparent than in, as you started with, Rocket Raccoon. Watching his backstory be unfolded here as the interstitial sort of transitional mid scenes of this entire film is a really interesting choice. And I think it helps the pacing of this movie a lot. I think that instead of cutting from scene to scene in a normal way, almost every sequence has a Rocket flashback somewhere in between. And they don't always connect back to what's exactly happening on screen. It's kind of just like a linear series of events through Rocket's childhood. But fleshing that out and using it as a way to build like a pre-found family. Because Rocket had a whole host of characters that were his original found family before he escaped and became a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy. That, I think, makes it even more poignant when he has that he's the one with the real group around him by the end of the film. He was all alone, then he had friends, and they had that ripped away from him, killed in front of his eyes. Then he built that back up, and now that we have this history to him, and we know the trauma that he has endured more, we know it more clearly. It was always kind of implied. Like, I figured I could have basically guessed that this is what happened, but now we've seen it. It makes all the moments of him pushing back against the rest of the Guardians a lot more emotionally impactful when you think back to in Guardians 1 and in Guardians 2, and then even in Infinity War when he's having that conversation with Thor where he's like, yeah, I've lost a lot of people too. Now we know who those people and those friends and those family members were. I think it's a really smart choice to balance and edit the film this way because it's a very distinct editing choice, but it really works wonders for the pacing and the emotional arc of this film.
When you get those moments of Rocket talking to Teefs and Lila and Floor, and he's talking about how he wants to build great machines that fly and they can fly off into the great beyond forever.
Yeah. Oof. I'm getting chills thinking about that.
It's clicking in your mind that's like, he wanted to do this all originally, and now he has the Guardians to do this with. And he doesn't want to lose them in Rocket's own way. That's why he's so abrasive and such an asshole towards these people. And that's the arc that we've seen him going on since the very first film, the introduction of this character. It's all getting context now. And I mean, they all have tragic backstories where they all, have some sort of failing in them. But I think Rocket's is easily, I don't think anybody would disagree with this, easily the most tragic. This tortured creature who was told over and over again by the High Evolutionary, who we have to talk about as well, that he is nothing, essentially, that he's only good for his brain. Like, he as a creature, as a person, essentially, is not useful.
Flawed, ugly, broken
only
down,
good because
not worthy
only good because
of any good traits.
Only good because the High Evolutionary made him and needs him, not anything of his own merit. It's easily the most tragic. And yes, again, when his friends are gunned down by the High Evolutionary's guards, that's a tragic moment. The scream, the guttural scream that he has when Lila dies. They got you for 3 movies in a row, 3.5 movies in a row, 4 movies in a row. James Gunn has you caring for the space raccoon. He did it again, and more than you ever have. It's really, really incredible. I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, and I think the only problem that I have with Rocket here is kind of what I was alluding to earlier of some of the characters getting a little bit shafted in this larger ensemble narrative, is current Rocket doesn't get too much to do because he's out of it for most of the movie. And so then when he comes back, I frankly expected to focus a lot more on him. But as soon as he comes back, we're right into the third act action sequence, and he doesn't get too many emotional moments, though I do think there are moments of him saving the baby raccoons, facing down the High Evolutionary, refusing to kill him at the end, and, of course, forming the Guardians, dancing, all that stuff. There are moments there, but, like, he shows up so late in the game, like, the Rocket that we know, we're like, okay, so Rocket has been throughout this entire movie, but Rocket hasn't been throughout this entire movie, which is just weird, but I think ultimately it does pay off, even if it's like, it's unbalanced, but that's kind of okay.
I mean, you talk about how he saves the baby raccoons, and I think that is the key moment for our...
And the other animals,
of course, but when he looks at the word raccoon pasted on that cage, I think that's the key moment, because what is the common refrain that we've had since the very first film? Rocket is saying, he's not a raccoon.
There ain't no thing like
except me. Exactly. And while that is a statement of independence and individuality, it is also a statement of Rocket's internalized loneliness. He feels like there isn't anything like him except for him. And he...
Yeah. Well, also forced loneliness, because he had never been aware, other than when he was like an infant, that there were others of his species. Of course, you'd have others calling him raccoon. He's like, no, that's not true. But that's like an internal defense of like, no, I must be the only one because I've never seen anything else like myself. And I always, you could always have that in the back of your mind. It's like, this is obviously what he means by this, but having it realized in a sort of an external way, not only because all the other experimented animals that were his friends when he was younger died in front of him. So from that way, there's no thing like him except him, but also getting to see him recognize like his own species in his eyes, like that was a really, really powerful moment.
And he gets to save them. That's the most important thing. He gets to save all the animals again when he didn't get to save his friends. He gets to relive that moment. He gets the second chance. That is so important in the Guardians films.
Yeah, and they actually reiterate that quite a few times throughout this film. Like, everyone deserves a second chance. They do it in reference to Adam
Drax
Warlock,
says it to Adam Warlock.
Yeah, and I think that's brought up other time.
Technically, Groot says it to Adam Warlock, and then Drax translates for him.
Yes, good point. But I actually do want to shift gears off of Rocket to the other element of this film that I think worked the best, which is, believe it or not, Nebula. Yeah. She is my favorite character in this film, and I am genuinely shocked to be saying that. She was kind of a non-starter.
She was
in
like
Guardians
she was a mini-boss, essentially. A secondary antagonist.
Yeah, she was a mini-boss in Guardians 1, and in Guardians 2, she was much more present, but she was an antagonistic force, begrudgingly antagonistic force, or begrudgingly helping them occasionally. And then, when she is forced to work alongside other people in the events of Infinity War and Endgame, I started warming up to her a little bit more. I still didn't love her in Endgame, but I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, it's interesting that Nebula is here. But having that experience and seeing her grow into a caring person over the course of all these films, so slowly, bits of her facade being chipped away till what you end up at the end of this movie, she's just as, like, passionate about being caring for others, taking steps to rebuilding those who have been harmed in the future, supporting a community. She's Rocket's the heart of this movie, but she's kind of the soul of this movie to me, and in the way that she shows the most growth across the entire range of films, and her being like probably maybe this character with the most amount of screen time, or very close, is like a huge change. And I really loved everything they did for her here, because she's really the leader of the Guardians in this movie. She is the one telling people what to do when they're on nowhere. She's the one communicating with others. She's sort of the middleman between everyone else. And you can see the bonds that she has built with the rest of the family, even though she's like the kind of the last one there. I found that to be a really interesting reinvention of her character that made me just adore her. And Karen Gillan's performance is so much better in this movie, because she's not giving the full-on Nebula raspy voice. It's kind of like halfway down, and I think it gave her a lot more emotional like tenor in her voice, and she had so much more range of emotions to work with here. I loved Nebula in this movie.
I think James Gunn really hit a neat trick here, because as we'll talk about, he was handed a bum hand with Gamora and what happened to her in Infinity War and Endgame. I think what the trick that he hits here is making Nebula essentially to where Gamora would have been, without the romantic connection to Peter Quill, of course. Because he gives her the very same Gamora arc, to where she was an assassin for Thanos. She was trained to be individualistic, uncaring, unfaltering in her like mission to kill and maim and carry out those acts, and transforms her into someone who cares about the Guardians, but also cares about everyone else, all other living creatures. She does that complete 180, the very same that Gamora does, but you get to see it play out over a longer arc. You get it divorced from any sort of like specific romantic connection like Gamora had.
True, yeah. And
I mean, as much as it's played as a joke, as a lot of things are, obviously, in the Guardians films, the line where Gamora says, "Who you're describing sounds more like her," referencing Peter Quill's adoration of his Gamora, and then Gamora saying that sounds like Nebula. That's true. Like the points where he's like, "You brought the Guardians together, and you formed the Guardians, and now you care about people, and you're a guardian of the galaxy, and you go out on missions, and empathetically and self-aggrandizing, or not, the opposite of self-aggrandizing, selflessly go out and save people and save these communities that you have no connection to." That is Nebula now, and it's I think it's a really neat trick that James Gunn pulled here with what he does in reference to Nebula and Gamora.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about Gamora. I think she's kind of one of the least interesting parts of this movie.
A lot of people recognize that James Gunn did what he could with that character now.
And I think he did the best that he could. I think that putting her into a B-tier role in this movie, I think, is a good choice, because paying off the emotional arc of the characters that we have seen grow across the course of the entire movies with Quill and Drax and Mantis and Nebula and Rocket, that's the focus. That was the most important, and he obviously did that well, as we're going to continue getting into some of these other characters. But I think that including this version of Gamora, showing where the Guardians started, sort of as a juxtaposition of where they started versus where they've ended up, did end up kind of calling into my mind, like, wow, they really have grown. Because you can see her being a Ravager and not being trusting, and sort of coming to grips with the fact that these people have found a family, and that maybe she can do that herself, this new Gamora. I found that to be a good use of this weird alternate universe semi-character that we weren't sure what they were going to do with her. And putting her in this role to being sort of the outside look into the Guardians family, I think is a really powerful choice to show someone like reacting to the care that they have for one of these. Throughout the film, she's like, wow, like Rocket must be a really good guy, or she says good pet. Yeah. But if you're going to go through all of this, because she doesn't have those connections with everyone, but we as viewers, through her eyes, are able to realize, like, wow, they really have come to form such a deep and powerful bond. And I thought she was well utilized in this film, even if like that character doesn't get the most screen time, the most development. She is sidelined, but I think that's a good thing, and her usage is really smart in this complex of a screenplay.
I think Gamora is really interesting in how James Gunn uses her in this film, because what the Russos did, essentially, and how James Gunn played it is, he basically just knocked Gamora's character arc back a couple of steps.
Yeah.
This Gamora, again, feels incapable of love. She is akin to a Nebula in, like, a Guardians Volume 2, or Gamora at the very beginning of the Guardians trilogy. And he flipped the script a little bit. Gamora is no longer part of the Guardians. But she is a Ravager. I mean, that's where she's been for a majority of this film. And what he does is give you the inclination that Gamora is going to have to learn those same Guardians lessons with the Ravagers now. Like, off-screen, somewhere in the future, she is going to become the Gamora that we know. She's going to develop as a character, but with the Ravagers. I think that's beautiful. And Peter is like the audience that wants our Gamora back. You know, we had that Gamora. Yeah. We loved her as a character, and we can't have her anymore because that's not our Gamora. There's a line that there's a lot of lines that I only picked up on the second rewatch, which is why I think it definitely would behoove you or anyone absolutely. to go see Guardians the second time, where she says, I want to be with the Ravagers. She says something along the lines of, they're my family. And Peter lashes out because he still wants Gamora. You know, that he is her lily pad, as the analogy is given. For
75-80% of the film, he's really on that drive of like, I want you to be what I lost. And she's like, fuck off.
What he says is, the Ravagers aren't a family. You aren't a Ravager. I should know I'm a Ravager.
Yeah.
Like, completely invalidating that connection towards that newfound family that she has. And at the end of the film, we get the beautiful, heartfelt send-off with the best that James Gunn could do, I think, in the situation, with the, I bet we were fun. And then that's a great Peter line. Says,
it's a great line.
It works on so many levels.
More than you could ever know.
More than you could ever know. And that line, I bet we were fun, works on our level for the audience and on their level. It's a brilliant line. And then you get to see over the Dog Days Are Over by Florence and the Machine, which is a great, like, upbeat sort of, but with some melancholy sort of lyrics in there. Great song to end this film on. You see her, like, celebrating and hugging the Ravagers and everything. That's what really cements, like, that's Gamora's story. That is this Gamora's story now.
Yeah.
She's no longer our Gamora. It's not the Gamora that we knew, unfortunately, but she's gonna be okay. She's gonna be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we did some pretty nice transition over to one Peter Jason Quill, who I think gets a lot of really interesting character growth in this film. We have seen him grow to be confident in leading a group over the course of the movies. We've seen him become a little more less self-interested than he was when we started, but he still has that childish edge to him, as we see in the beginning and sort of the middle points of this film, that he's refusing to acknowledge his own emotional flaws. He's drunk at the beginning of this film, which is weird. They don't play that out across the course of the movie. It's kind of
he doesn't have time to drink. Yeah,
weird thing. That's a great point. He's go for the rest of the film. But seeing him wrestle with the longing that he feels for the woman that he loved, and not being able to realize that because this other woman is not who he wants, and seeing him come to terms with that by the end of the film, and being like, no, it's okay. Like, he like realizes with himself, we had our time together, and that can't be taken away from me, and you can find your own way forward. I think that watching him, like the Peter that we knew from the beginning of Guardians 1 to the end point of him showing up a tiny bit in Endgame, could not have made this mature of a decision. And he doesn't.
To be like, we see him flub that same decision in Infinity War. Twice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah, and he flubs that decision in smaller ways here, as he's consistently trying to say, like, no, you you need to recapture that. We can, you just have to work at it. Like, we can regain what we had. But then by the end of the film, he recognizes that's not possible. And I really thought that was nice. And I also think that, it's kind of subtle, but the way that he has constantly been, waxing nostalgic about the culture of Earth as a child, and how passionate he is about the songs and referencing pop culture and all of this stuff, but being refusing to connect back to Earthling heritage because he doesn't really know it. He's grown up with Ravagers. He's grown up in space. He's grown up having sex with a Flarkafloop or whatever he says in Guardians 1. He doesn't feel... He's scared across the course of the films to reconnect with Earth. And having him make the mature enough decision to leave the Guardians, his current found family, and return to his grandfather on Earth and live a simple life, talking about mowing and eating cereal at a breakfast table, that is, I think, it's not the most overt thing in this film or across his entire character, but watching him leave Earth at the very beginning of the first film, like the opening section of the first film, and return to his grandpa at the very end, I think is a really satisfying arc for this character to go on.
Yeah. Peter's arc is probably the one that, I'll say it, I misunderstood the most on my first time watching this, because I was like, Peter has no connection to Earth. Why would he go back? He has no connection there. I think that's something that he says a couple times. I remember a line from Guardians 2 where when they're on Ego's planet, he says that exact thing. I have no connection to Earth. And Gamora rebuts that in saying, yes, you do, but this place, Ego's planet, where he's like basically a god, is a fantasy. It's the ultimate fantasy for him. And he's been living out that fantasy as an adult, living in space, being a Ravager, being a Guardian of the Galaxy, and again, like you said, Tucker, running from that connection that he does have. And he denies, and really clicked with me when I was like, and it's so obvious that he does have that connection. The music that he has, all of like his 1980s merchandise.
He's got a Pac-Man patch on his backpack.
When Gamora like starts unpacking his stuff in Guardians Volume 3, he has like Alf trading cards. He has a report card from when he was in middle school in his backpack. And I'm like, why else would he be holding on to all this stuff if he didn't have that connection to Earth? If somewhere deep down inside of Peter Quill, he did want to go back, but he was too afraid. And the analogy, and again, they turn this into a joke, but it's a good analogy for this whole film, is he's been using lily pads this whole time, and he needs to learn how to swim. It's not that you go, that's a bad thing to go and swim. It's not that it's a bad thing to use lily pads. It's just like a necessary step that you need to do. You can't stay on those lily pads forever. It's great. Yeah.
And he also, I think, gets his best moments of acting in the whole trilogy here. The scream that he delivers when Rocket is
It's like
dead.
his mom on the table again, except this time it's Rocket, his best friend, or second best friend, depending on who you ask. But it's like his mom laying there on the table again, and oh my god, it's good. It's a emotional home run from James Gunn in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the reason why I was able to pick up on this arc of his that I think is relatively subtle. You do have to read into the context clues of him being obsessed with Earth music and culture and all of that. But is through the character of Mantis, who I think has, much like Nebula, grown to be one of my favorite characters in the Guardians, starting from me thinking she was just kind of annoying in Guardians 2, and then her being like, actually, I think a lot funnier in Infinity War and in the holiday special, getting a lot of characterization and seamlessly continuing that on to here, where she feels a much stronger connection to the Guardians as her basically the only family she's ever had. And I think the key element of her character, it both played through her abilities and the writing of her dialogue between everyone, is her power of empathy. The joke is that you can be an empath. I'm an empath. I sense something, but we all know that's literally what Mantis is. Like, that's her ability. It's her species, whatever. And her ability to describe to people what they are feeling, understand them on a personal level, and she doesn't have too much of a filter on her.
No.
So she will just spit out things that sound blunt, sound too, maybe a little too on the nose, but for her character, her personality, her writing makes so much sense in especially the sequence that she's like, Peter, you need to go back to
she
Earth.
says,
it's so out of nowhere. It's random, but she feels him. She might actually like be able to read his memory or whatever and know that. It doesn't matter. But she has a bond with Peter. She recognizes him as her brother, as we saw through the holiday special. And she knows that this is an element of him that he still has not gotten over. And also the Gamora stuff, which is why she's like able to give him advice at multiple points throughout the film. I really love Mantis in this film. I think we got okay, actually let's say Rocket's the heart, Nebula is the soul. No, Rocket's the brain. Let's say Rocket's the brain, Nebula's the soul, and Mantis I think is the heart of this movie. Because I think that her empathy with all the other characters and being able to patch together the rocky relationships that they have, Nebula arguing with Drax, Nebula insulting her, being able to explain why people are feeling a certain way. I loved her inclusion in this film. I think she's great from a comedic perspective, but I really think she's the core of why the character dynamics in this film feel as rich and as satisfying as they are, because she's able to just say things flat out. It's like, this is how someone is feeling. You should understand that. Don't be this rude. She just spits it out, and I love how she works in this film.
I mean, Tucker, you basically said it all there. All there is to say about Mantis. She has that moment towards the beginning of the film when they're trying to get through the shields to go to the ogoscope or whatever, something like that. Orgoscope. And she does say, like, Peter, you are like lamenting about how, you've lost all these people and how these people are leaving you essentially. But you also left someone. You have someone back on Earth who cares about you. And he's like, what are you bringing this stuff up? I'm talking about people who died. That has nothing to do with that. She is the only one with emotional intelligence on the entire team. And it comes around at the end when Nebula, when they are trapped on the high evolutionary ship, when Nebula is arguing with her and says, whenever someone displays weakness, i.e. emotion, you're there to support it. You're there to egg on that weakness, i.e. emotion. And then Mantis says something about how Drax is the only one of you who doesn't hate himself, and how she doesn't care that he's stupid. And I have to jump in here because I don't know. This is one moment that I don't really understand yet. I don't know if this is a poor writing moment or what it is, but early in the film, when they're talking about making Peter not depressed, Mantis says, "It's not right to use my power on my friends. There's something immoral about that." Yeah. But later in the film, when she's talking about how she loves Drax and Drax is stupid, she makes him forget that she says that. Yeah, and I don't understand that. Like.
Yeah, I think you're right that it might just be an easy out of a writing moment of like, okay, look, this movie's already 2.5 hours long. This is an interesting moment, like conceptually and emotionally, but we gotta see Drax get over this.
But
so we can
she
continue the
should
sequence.
Explain it to him is my thing. Like, take a line or two,
absolutely.
take a line or two or three of dialogue to like have Mantis talk that out with Drax. He's like. Maybe don't have her call him stupid. That's just step one. Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, that's just like one of the couple of things that still stick out to me after all this.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a strange moment.
You want to talk about Drax? Let's talk about Drax.
Yeah.
Probably the most underserved, I would say. Because he has of that core group, he has become more continually like. He's the guy who doesn't understand things. He's the stupid character, as Mantis says. But he does still get a good payoff at the end of the day.
I think he absolutely does. I think that what Guardians 3 gives him makes him a richer character than he has been in the previous films. I do think that after Guardians 1, he kind of stabilized. There wasn't too much more learned about him, even through Holiday Special, where he was a focus of it. We didn't get to learn too much about him.
He doesn't get to kill Thanos, which a couple people brought up that, like, his whole thing after Ronin was that he wanted to kill Thanos, and he's not even like present around any of that. Like he's in the Endgame battle, of course, but doesn't really have any connection to killing Thanos. But of course, the payoff that we get here is in that moment where they need to connect with the children on the High Evolutionary ship, and he communicates this one with them. He speaks their language. He calms them down. He is no longer meant to be Drax the Destroyer. He was born to be a father. He gets to have that community, that family that he lost due to Ronan the Accuser and Thanos after all this time.
Yeah. And the reason that I say this film adds texture to his character is I think that the idea of having this latent paternal instinct in this incredibly violent, vicious character, this emotion has existed within him for the entire history of this film. We just didn't know it because there was never really, outside of, I guess, raising baby Groot, there was never really an opportunity for him to show that paternalistic side. And seeing him be good with kids and make them smile and realize at the end of the film that the direction that he wants to take, and I think we can also talk a little bit more about the ending as when eventually we wrap up the discussion. I think there's still plenty to get to. But his direction is that he doesn't have to be violent. He can be a caring person. He can be a dad to these kids who probably never even had a father. Like, they were probably grown somewhere. These kids are like, they kind of show up out of nowhere. It's kind of like there's not really much history to them. But him having that paternalistic side and realizing I can nurture that instead of nurturing my vengeful side is a really satisfying note to end that character on. Because basically the only thing that we knew about him in his history is that he lost his family, and because of that loss he was vengeful. But now he's come to terms with that he can find another family, as he did to the Guardians, but in a more direct correlation, be a father to other people who have lost their families. I really like that. Even though I do think you're right, he doesn't get them the breadth of emotional moments that Nebula, Mantis, Rocket, and Quill do. He definitely has a very satisfying punch to the end of the film that makes him a more interesting character in retrospect. And I think that, it works very well for the screen time that he's getting.
And you get the ultimate payoff for Drax, which is he dances. He dances at the end of the movie. And that's like, this is the thing where, like, if I could, James Gunn, I'm going to travel back in time and tell you how to just fix that one little thing, if I may. I'm going to help out James Gunn. He needs a little help as a writer, obviously. But, like, at the beginning of the film, one of the very first lines is from Drax, "Only idiots dance." Because Mantis asked him to dance to "Creep" by Radiohead, which is an act of a Herculean effort within itself to be able to dance to that song. But, like, he dances at the end, and to fix that, like, moment of Mantis calling him an idiot, just do a thing of, like, we're all idiots at the end of the day. We're all flawed. We're all idiots, stuff like that. And they're all dancing at the end. I don't know. It seems like an easy, and it's something that they were, like, sort of leaning towards, because I know that idiot is an insult that they throw around a lot at each other in these movies. But, like, it cropped up a couple times here where Rocket calls them all idiots for going back to save him and stuff like that. It seems like something they were leading towards. Maybe not. Maybe didn't come to full fruition, or maybe I'm reading too much into it.
No, I think you might be right, but also I guess that, like, retroactive, like, okay, I guess that is a flaw. But I'm not quite sure how.
Well, I'm not saying like that's an issue with the film. I'm just being like, it's kind of a thing that I, like, picked up on a couple times. We talked about, like, where every other character ends up. I guess we didn't talk about Mantis, like, goes off on her own because she's never been able to, as she says, really make a decision for herself. And so she just kind of, like, goes off on her own. Just, like, the most purely, like, I gotta go find my own way forward. We talked about where Peter ends up. We talked about where Drax ends up. We talked about where Nebula ends up. I think we skipped over where Rocket ends up. This in the post-credit scene of this film, where as you mentioned last night, him and Peter have always been sort of, like, wrestling for control of the Guardians. And Rocket finally gets that. He gets that second chance to save everybody. He feels able and capable, not only in his, like, logistical skills as a leader, but in his like emotional, interpersonal skills as a leader now, to lead the Guardians of the Galaxy. As Peter says, it's all yours now. You'll be a better leader than I ever was. And he is...
Yeah. And they get that very kind of hammy moment, but I think emotionally resonant moment of them all giving him the Ravager salute, of tapping on their chest. And you see it in his eyes that he realizes that this is his path forward. He's been wanting it, but I think doing some psychoanalysis of Rocket Raccoon in Guardians of the Galaxy 1 through Endgame is he never really wanted that. He wanted to be respected, but I don't know if he necessarily wanted to be put into the position of full power because he didn't have that emotional capability. But he now realizes that he does have that emotional capability, as we see in the moments of after he gets back up and keeps on trucking, that he knows that he's not alone in the universe, that he doesn't have to exact this vengeance that he has been holding deep within him for his entire history, and that he has found that confidence to be a leader. And seeing him be that role as the leader of the New Guardians at the end, I think is a really nice character arc for him to end up. And I don't know if we're ever going to see that.
Yeah,
team.
that's an interesting question. I want to get to that.
But I don't think we need for it to be a good end for his character in this movie.
Circling back to the moment, I want to talk about Animal Heaven for a second.
Okay.
Where you get, like, but wait, Rocket's not going to die, actually, because I don't need to say it. We all thought Rocket was going to die. That's what I was all pointing to.
Well, we thought multiple
we did, and I want to talk about, like, nobody dying at the in a bit as well. But I think it works on multiple levels if it's like actually the afterlife, and he's talking to the spirits, the spirit of Lila in that moment as sort of like an omnipotent force, or if that is just like a Rocket the deepest inner monologue that you can get. If he is just like flipping that switch within himself through this sort of vision of Lila, of recognizing it's not my time to go yet. Like the story, they say it, the story has been yours the whole time. And it has been, as I sort of talked about at the beginning, where I think like Rocket is like, he traces the absolute arc of the Guardians of the Galaxy. He is the most flawed, and he becomes the new leader, the most redeemed, I think.
Yeah.
The story's been his the whole time, and it's not his time to go just yet.
Yeah.
And it's no one's time to go just yet, because none of the core characters die in this film, which is really interesting to me, which is, as you said, I was totally expecting.
Yeah.
And we get a fake out, we get like the, no, it's not actually time for you to go moment for Rocket. There's like a kind of a moment for Drax when he gets shot with that thing, but obviously he's just a little bit injured. But the big one, the big one is Peter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Frozen in space for the second time. And this is something I realized, because my initial instinct is to say, I don't like the Peter fake out death. That's my initial instinct. James Gunn knows that this is the third film. He's been promoting it as the last time we will see these Guardians, although we do see that the legendary Star-Lord will return.
Yeah.
But in
some form or fashion.
But he knows that imagery carries more weight than it does in Guardians 1 when Peter almost dies, or in Guardians 2 when Peter almost dies. In Guardians 3, that imagery carries more weight. I feel like it does. At the same time, however, I remember that Peter has almost died at the end of each of these previous installments. So it's kind of like half six in one hand, half a dozen in the other, where I'm like, I can see both sides of it, and I come out feeling just like, yeah, it's part of the movie. I get it. I understand it. It pays off in a good moment. Yeah.
I think the reason that I don't love that moment. I think that he doesn't die is totally fine, but I wish that they hadn't done
like a fake out,
death, because he has this like crazy badass action scene where he's like slipping under, he's like doing like Titanfall parkour to like get out of this exploding spaceship, and then he just like stops, and because he like bumps into like some debris, and then like it's a really underwhelming end to that like action sequence, and it also. It serves as like the only thing that Adam Warlock
it's Adam Warlock's redeeming moment, because he fails multiple times.
Which is okay.
He fails multiple times to kill the Guardians, and he like has this arc of like, oh, I can like care for things and care for people, and it's his moment to go out and rescue him. We do like the creation of Adam, which is very tongue-in-cheek, and like it's like right up to the edge of me being like, oh brother. But I just gotta be like,
it's really quick.
It's very quick, and like it got a laugh in our theater too. Then he rescues him. So I don't know if I'm a fan of the Peter fake out death either. I would say that I'm not. I would prefer not to have it. Because it does just feel very like, we gotcha. You thought we were gonna kill somebody. We're not gonna kill anybody. We gotcha though. We gotcha.
Yeah. I think that the ultimate reward of it having an emotional moment, but also working for the end of Adam Warlock's arc, I think is I understand what he was going for. But I think that it also just sort of points out how underserved Adam Warlock is in this script. He's really the main critique with this ensemble cast. I think what he stands for as in the movie is totally fine, but the expectation of this brand new ultra powerful character with this lore and this connection to the Marvel universe not getting a very big role in this film, it's an expectation thing that I brought in that I was like why even bother at this point? I wanted him to end up on the ship as he does, as the planet is exploding, and then be alongside the Guardians for the rest of the film. Have some moments of banter, have some conversations with the rest of them, but instead he disappears, and then he's like tattered, and then he saves Peter. Leading up to that point, I was like, okay, he's in the background. He's got this connection to the High Evolutionary. He's going against the Guardians. He's got this thing with his mom. And like learning that he doesn't have to just be violent. He can care for other characters and people and creatures. I think that's all fine. But I think the fact that he like just basically disappears for the rest of that third act, and then is just a Deus Ex Machina at the very end is a little bit underwhelming. I understand why he doesn't get that much information or screen time or involvement, because you as the last film in this trilogy, focusing on that core group of characters, extending out to Nebula and Mantis, who weren't members of the original team, but you know what I'm saying. It was the most important. So I think he's just kind of here to like add some visual spectacle, add a minor character arc, have a funny guy who says a couple funny things. So he's fine. His inclusion is fine, but it's not the best that you could have done with that character.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are sort of expressing some disappointment in how they handle Adam Warlock, especially after we've gotten, sort of 6 years of Adam Warlock. We planted the Adam Warlock seed at the end of Guardians 2, and how's it going to come around? And ultimately, like, I don't feel disappointed in him. Like, I like Will Poulter. I think he's fun in the role. He is, like, sort of like this bumbling oaf a little bit who doesn't really understand what people think. It's sort of like in that Drax vein of comedy a little bit. And he serves to like kick the entire story off. So ultimately, I think he's a good he's a good force of story progression in this thing. I do see complaints of like he disappears for a long time. I do have a weird question that I don't know if I missed something or if this was lost in the edit somehow. So on Counter Earth, okay, boom, we're blowing up all the houses. We're doing it, and Adam Warlock is flying to go save Elizabeth Debicki, but she blows up, and he gets like fucking, he gets thrown away. When we next see him, he's like sort of like strapped down on the Guardian's ship.
He lands in the Guardian ship. No, you just missed it.
He flies all the way back.
And his little... No, there's not an all the way back. Elizabeth Debicki with her son in the back seat in the kitty seat with his little teddy bear, park next to the Guardian ship because they are following the coordinates of the Guardian's ship. So they are very close to the Guardian ship on Counter Earth.
They're close, but like so he's on the Guardian ship when shit starts blowing up, okay? Because he went to go get Rocket, and then shit starts blowing up. He fucking whooshes out of there, and that's when we get the Black Adam shot of him flying by all the houses. He flies for a long ways up to his mom's ship.
That's true. In that shot, he does. But they are close enough by to, and I guess he's just going in a straight line. So if an explosion happened, maybe it.
And
would
then he's
shoot
like,
him
but
all the way
he's
back.
also like strapped down on the Guardian ship. I'm like, when did that happen?
Yeah, that's the edit part. That's the edit part that like doesn't make a lot of sense. But I agree that like there's that tiny bit like I want to see them be like, oh shit, he's here. We should like strap him up. That's like a
I can
scene.
understand contextually that is what happened. I'm just like, oh, that's a bit of a jump that we saw him.
Yeah, no,
we saw
it
him
absolutely is.
explode, and then he's like just on their ship. I'm like, I can intuit.
No, we see him land in the Guardian ship though.
Do you?
Because Gamora sees him and the little fluffy weird thing land on the ship, and then the little fluffy weird thing runs up and like sits next to her while she's trying to pilot the ship out of there, and he's like crumpled in the back. We see him fly in. He looks up at her, and then he like crumples to the ground.
Yes.
So I think actually he flew back.
Okay.
He flew back to
the ship. Good catch there.
Yeah.
Good catch. I'm just a fool. I'm a dummy.
It's okay. You did not miss them strapping him down.
That just doesn't happen. Okay.
But there are some other characters that we still have not talked about. I want to end with the High Evolutionary, but I want to talk about a couple of the B tier characters in this film. A B tier character who is an A tier character is one Mr. Groot.
Yes, of course.
Groot in this film, I think, gets the least emotional Groot moments than we've got. I guess he doesn't really have emotional moments as Baby Groot, but whatever. But he's also the coolest goddamn Groot that we've ever had. And so, like, even though he doesn't get the emotional moments, I understand, like, screenplay-wise, that's going to everyone else. But his new look is awesome. His new abilities are fucking off the rails. And I just really like that they have just expanded what Groot can be. He can grow to be gigantic. His kaiju mode. He can hide weapons within himself and grow 10 arms. He can be a spider head. Yeah, he can do this really awesome thing when they're attacking the High Evolutionaries, a bunch of people up in his tower, where he like while he's shooting, he grows out things to like shield
he can grow
Peter. He can grow wings, which is weird, but like
it sticks,
whatever. It's fucking
gliding.
awesome.
Like he's just falling with style. So
Yeah. I really liked their expansion of what Groot can do in this movie because he was always a lot of fun and very unique. Especially in that first movie, he was doing things like growing a flower, sending out some little lights, lighting things up, growing tall, having the ladder on him, like using his
he becomes
arm
the big
spikes.
Groot ball to save everyone.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. That's true. But they went that tenfold here. And it makes him a really interesting force to be reckoned with in these action sequences. And I really like that.
Absolutely. Another B tier character, Kraglin, I assume was maybe one you want to talk about.
Kraglin Cosmo.
Kraglin and Cosmo have this sort of running joke of Kraglin calls Cosmo a bad dog because Cosmo shows up him trying to use the arrow. We get a very simple like setup payoff there. We get the reappearance of Michael Rooker's Yondu. Love that. Use your heart, boy.
And Seth Green's
of
Howard
course
the
we
Duck.
see him. But yeah.
Oh, and the fucking guy from the first one that was selling this
eyebrows.
The eyebrows guy. That was random. I guess no wait, they're on Nowhere. No wait, but he's from Xandar. He's on Xandar.
I don't know.
Whatever, doesn't fucking matter. He's just in it.
But yeah, like that's good. I like Maria Bakalova as Cosmo. I think she's really funny. Doing a very funny like Russian accent, telling stories about the Soviets back in the '60s, and it's just fun stuff. It's really fun, and they are the part of the new Guardians team that we may or may not see going forward. But I think that there's also like emotional like work to be done there because we do get some of that. We see that Kraglin feels a bit inadequate. Like that's his whole thing. He feels inadequate trying to like carry on this legacy of Yondu, who we knew for a long time on the Ravagers. I think there's even some things you can do where Cosmo needs like this validation. She can't handle being called a bad dog. Mantis even like has to reassure her that she's like very strong when she's trying to hold the two ships together, or High Evolutionary ship and Nowhere together. I think there's stuff you can do there for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like their inclusion here. I think that the great strength of the Guardians is bringing together a wide cast of wacky characters, and even the ones that served smaller roles in earlier films can have emotional payoff by the end of their second or third appearance. And I just like that Cosmo was a bit in the first movie, and then she shows up for a little bit in the holiday special. She was an Easter egg in the first movie, shows up a little bit in the holiday special, and then she is a part of the wider Guardians family here. And I think that having that extra ability that she has and bringing a little bit of sense of humor and having her and Kraglin kind of have a dynamic which did not exist previously, but now is a thing that I will remember about these characters. I like both of their inclusion a lot. I think that Kraglin, I was expecting him to be a part of like the core team because he's like always presented alongside the Guardians and he was like kind of leading that way at the end of 2. But I like that. I like their inclusion here. They get enough screen time to where they feel like a presence, and I understand their personalities. And you're right, we like get a little bit of read into their psyche and the way that their dynamic works. But they don't overstay their welcome, and I think that's definitely
really important. High Evolutionary,
but we have a villain. Yeah, we have a villain to talk about here.
So people, leading up to this film, the things that people were saying was the High Evolutionary is one of the most evil, hateable Marvel villains that we've ever gotten. Probably the most. And I agree. Like, we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, that he is relatively simple. He has the connection to Rocket, of course, but he's not complex. There is no Killmonger to this character where you're like, he has a point a little bit. He is just through and through evil. Just fucking a vile, hateable, egotistical villain. And he's really good. He is screaming, he is spittling, he is pulling out all the stops. He is, like, the moment where he
psychologically abusing like half our characters.
When I talked about it earlier, that guttural scream that Rocket has when Lila and Teefs and Floor all die, and then he like mocks Rocket for doing that.
Yeah, ooh, that's
just a moment where you're like, this guy needs to fucking kick it already. Okay, this guy needs to fucking die.
And he might have
probably kicked it. I mean, well, I don't think we'll see, but. Yeah, I mean, the moment where all the Guardians are fucking wombo comboing him up and down on into walls and stuff like that, you're just like, yeah, I've had enough of this guy. Get rid of this fucking guy right now.
Yeah, I think he's the best example that we've had of a two-dimensional, just fucking bad guy, just straight up fucking villain. But he has enough charisma in his performance. Chukwudi Iwuji is really hamming it up. He's delivering these really like complex lines. He's using a lot of weird terminology that like gives him this distinct sense of personality, and then he's just screaming and he's just abusing people.
The line where he sort of, it's towards the end, and he's like, because he's obsessed with getting Rocket back. That is like his one thing. His ship is blowing up, people are dying, and he's like, go send more guys down there to see if 89P13 is down there. And his fellow scientists, his like lackeys, are like, dude, we gotta get out of here. We gotta cut our losses. And the line where one of them says, we gotta do for God's sake, and he spins around and he goes, there is no God. That's where I stepped in. Like, that's a killer villain line.
Yeah, and it's a killer villain performance, and it's a killer villain presence throughout the film. I think that the whole drive for him to be obsessed with retrieving Rocket, and then Rocket, the rest of the team being obsessed with ending him and making sure that he can't wreak any more havoc, and just his whole presence throughout this film. He has connections to all these people that we see on Counter Earth, which also gives us a very varied and interesting location conceptually to sort of look at. It gives us a little bit of sort of social commentary in that even this perfect society that someone's been striving their entire life to create still like has these sort of cesspools of imperfectness. And it really builds on a lot of the elements of the Guardians that makes them so special, is having that abusive past, the trauma, the obsession with imperfectness that these characters all sort of like feel and see themselves as imperfect. But I think he works as a really good catalyst for everything great about this movie. Because of his inclusion, we get the best fucking sets that the MCU has ever seen. The Orgoscope and High Evolutionary's fucking castle-sized ship and Counter Earth are just extraordinary production design. The amount of fucking masks on these people, the bread outfits that Nathan Fillion and his lackeys are wearing, the red bricks that make up the building, and they're like curving around and making this weird spiral, and the fleshiness of the surface that they land on. Like, this movie has such great concepts, and it delivers on them with phenomenal production design, great special effects where needed for these elements, and it just makes it feel so distinct, which I love about the Guardians movies. And I think was also one of my criticisms of Guardians 2 is there's really like 2 or 3 locations in this movie, where this one we're like traveling all around to a bunch of places, and I think this is the best that the MCU has looked production.
The Guardians movies have always brought it in their comic book imagery. We are not trying to be grounded at all in any of the Guardians films. It is all colorful, weird shapes, like a super alien extraterrestrial designs of things, and carrot head. Just the amount of juxtapose. A lot of people have just been juxtaposing Quantumania to this film, and I think it's nowhere. I think it's nowhere more relevant than the side characters, the bit characters, the background characters, because they're present in both, and they're just so dull and boring and nothing, and CGI like can be erased in a different edit of the movie sort of thing in Quantumania, versus in Guardians there is makeup work, there's a ton of them, all there, all real actors in prosthetics, in everything there. It's like night and day difference. When we're on Counter Earth, when there's just people roaming around in the background on the orgoscope, it's brilliant. Like, it really clicked with me on Counter Earth this time. It was like, these are all like people wearing like crazy ass bunny and bat and like pig prosthetic and makeups, like humanoid combinations. And
it would have been so easy for them to be like, okay, they landed in the area that was the bat area of Counter Earth, and so everyone's gonna have a similar mask, a little bit of variation, but no one's gonna really be paying attention. But instead, they went the exact opposite and be like, fuck you. Everyone is a different kind of fucked up half animal human, and they're just everywhere. And there's a fucking octopus guy, and there's a cockroach guy. Like, they reach into animals that I didn't even expect would be possible to make human masks out of. And I just love the dedication to that bit. Is like sort of like 70s Americana suburbia, but with like animal people, and they like take that down to the production design of funny family photos and billboards, and like, oh my god, it's so richly done that like it's incomparable to most of the things that even some of the earlier Guardians films did. I love I like Xandar,
but it's mostly just
Xandar.
Humans. It's humans walking around on Xandar.
Yeah. Exactly. Or, they've got like, a couple weird facial features or tattoos or whatever. And Nowhere as well, I think, is a great location. But with the Orgoscope High Evolutionaries Castle and Counter Earth here, we get a whole suite of people in different kinds of costumes with really rich color in the set design, with those reds I was talking about in the High Evolutionaries Castle, and the whites and yellows on the inside of the Orgoscope, which is a sort of like not organic, flesh-based structure. Like, I'm just so blown away by it looking as good as it did, because they put practical work into it. You think back to Shang-Chi and Katie arrive in Ta Lo, and it's just a fucking CGI forest ass background, and like, oh, okay, whatever. But like, these are fucking places in this movie. And I love it.
I also love it. Tucker, what else is there to talk about? I want to talk about the soundtrack. But yeah, or what did you say? Sorry,
I said action.
Okay, we can end with action. Okay. Soundtrack is obviously incredible. It was never not going to be incredible. But as always, I do have a couple favorites of how certain songs are utilized. Opening with "Creep" is funny also, but has resonance with, Rocket is singing along to a lot of these, and that's probably, he's singing along to more of them than he has in the past. I think he sung along to a couple in 2, probably not any in 1. But like, when he's singing along to "Creep" and you listen to the lyrics, and it's like, I want to have control, I want a perfect body and stuff like that. He's like, these are lyrics that apply to Rocket. Like his time with the High Evolutionary, who wants to control everything and stuff like that. It's all checking out. We're checking all the boxes. Good pick from James Gunn. the sweet guitar riff from Crazy on You as Adam Warlock is like coming out of the abyss of space, and it's boom 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 boom, and he's flying in. I'm like, that's just a cool ass intro for that character. When people talk about character intros, I want to be like, oh yeah, that sweet ass guitar riff when Adam Warlock was coming in. Let's see. The needle drop of Do You Realize, which is when it's after the orgoscope, and it's sort of like right before the lily pads conversation. And that's when Peter is really lamenting about Gamora. It's after they have their argument where he says, "You're not a Ravager, that are not your family, I'm a Ravager."
Yeah.
Just the name of the song, Do You Realize? He's like, why doesn't Gamora realize, like, why doesn't she understand the things that I'm telling her about? Like, why is it not clicking with her? I talked about the use of The Dog Days Are Over, which is just really a happy, fun, upbeat 2000s song that we end on as we
the only 2000s
as we like progress through like the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s through the course of this film. We end on the most future-facing song on the whole thing. And then we get Come and Get Your Love again in the post-credit scene.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I only recognized a couple of the songs. I thought that the song that they used in the trailer was awesome. And then they used it here as well.
Because they used two in the trailer. It's the Since You've Been Gone and In the Meantime. Oh yeah, well, I love both of those songs. But I presume you're talking about though. It's like Since You've Been Gone, Since You've Been Gone.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love all of them. Obviously, there was one more that I wanted to shout out. And this ties into Action Tucker. No Sleep Till Brooklyn, used in the Super Mario Brothers movie, and then again here, Tucker, where is it used better? Who could say?
Well, I didn't love the way that it was used here. I think that it's cool in the action sequence, but I think that it felt a little. I think
they
started when they're walking.
They started it a little early. I think.
Yes, I agree. But that fucking action
it's
sequence,
so cool.
The hallway fight, it's so awesome. I mean, the simulated one take there is one of the most impressive shots that the MCU has ever conceptualized. I mean, this is some really phenomenal work on the choreography and camera work team of the Guardians of the Galaxy films. Like, this is probably the best work that they've done. I mean, we've gotten some interesting camera work simulated one takes, like the opening fight in Guardians 2, which is also an awesome fight. But I think that the confidence in this one to have it be a simulated one take, and B, show the teamwork of the Guardians in the most like synergized way that they've ever been is a really great way to basically be the last fight scene of the Guardians of the Galaxy. I guess they beat the High Evolutionary the fuck up at the end, but I really liked watching them work together. Like, there's this moment when Groot is like stabbing some guys with his long ass fucking pole arms or whatever, and Mantis comes by and like swings off his arms like a pole, and then Drax and Peter are like back to back, like stabbing people and shooting people. And it's like there's such a sense that they have grown. They know each other, and they know each other's moves. They can like read each other's minds in this fight, and I really liked just how like full circle that moment felt of like all of them working together.
Yeah,
I love it.
I mean, we even get like I feel like the orgoscope fight is a bit of a harkening back to like the prison break thing in the first movie.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like a similar feel.
The plan goes wrong, and the gravity thing, and the whole thing.
And that's another great action sequence. I love the moment where Peter like pretends to like have a moment with this woman portrayed by Daniela Melchior, and he's just like, nah, I just needed into the system, and then he's like, told you she was into me. Like he's still doing like the classic smart ass Star-Lord stuff, but he's grown, but he's still giving us the stuff that we love, the stuff where we're like, maybe Chris Pratt is good. Actually, no, Chris Pratt is good. No.
He's really good in this movie. I think that he sells the most emotional moments, as we talked about, but he also sells a lot of really great comedic moments here. And he's sort of like, it's like a more mature edge to his comedy. Like, it was always immature comedy
he's a man-child
Peter Quill was portraying. Of course. But in this movie, he has like a little bit of a more grown-up edge to his comedy here. He's like kind of not taking anyone's shit. He's like commanding them. He's arguing with people in like a more serious tone here. And I really think the comedy here works really well, even though I think this movie is maybe the least like overtly comedic, because it's instead focusing on more emotional tones. A lot more dark sequences, a lot more violent sequences. Holy shit! When
just
Rocket
tearing up that dude's
scratches
face,
up,
dude.
My god, that is crazy. But I think it's balanced well with a little bit lighter comedy. It's not as much the comedy of the previous Guardians films, where a scene was geared to have an emotional or like a comedic payoff. For the most part,
it's the Guardian style to do that.
But,
like, obviously, you're going to have.
It's more ambient though in this one. I feel is we're doing normal scenes, but then the Guardians are funny, so they're going to be doing funny Guardians thing, like Drax trying to lay down on the couch. I thought that was hilarious. I love the bit of Mantis never landing.
She
on her
always
feet,
like scorpions on her face every time.
It's so weird, but it's just like every time it's just like a little moment of energy and fun and creativity. And I really did like the comedy in this movie. What the MCU's first fuck bomb?
Why'd you say fuck bomb? Just it's F bomb is the term.
Fuck bomb.
But you know, it's like used in such a like a off the like they did. There's no like pageantry about it around it. There's no like, all right, this is the first time the MCU's ever said fuck. Get ready for it.
Get in the fucking car.
It's just get in the fucking car. It's quick. It's quick like that, and it gets a big laugh because you're not expecting it.
Yeah.
And it's the perfect way to use it.
Yeah. Oh, also Nathan Fillion's character.
He just hates that dude.
He just hates the random guy, and he's like trying to match them. He's like
it comes up twice because obviously it comes up when he's talking to the Guardians, but when he's talking to Aisha, is it Aisha? And he's like, yeah, I got one. He's like, this Adam Warlock guy is pretty stupid. I got one of them too. He brings it up again. He's like, we know exactly what he's talking about. We get to see the interaction that he's talking about as well. It's just really well executed, as I think.
Ooh, what about Mantis making the guy love Drax? And he's like, God, I do this every time.
I mentioned this when we were talking about Mantis and Klementieff, but like all the little like very like the snickers and the laughs that she like lets loose a little bit throughout the film, especially when she's around Drax. I think as much as they like rub up, as much as they like are abrasive towards each other, they're like a really interesting dynamic. They're like brother and sister, like big pair. Brother, little sister.
Such a great pair.
And whenever she gets to like rib him back, it's always fantastic because he's always the one like, Mantis, you asshole, stuff like that. And when she gets to like toss it back in his direction, it's beautiful payoff.
Yeah. Any other jokes that stick out to you?
Not necessarily. I mean, there are plenty, of course, but not any ones that I'm like popping to the front of my brain right now.
Yeah. Any other action moments that you want to talk about before we wrap it up?
I think
give this movie.
I think I'm ready to do it. You know, this is
What about the fact that they used fucking Nowhere as a
awesome.
ship?
Yeah, awesome. When Nowhere comes to the portal and the High Evolutionary is like, oh fuck, oh shit.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Really awesome movie. Love this thing. There are just like little pebbles that you can throw at this thing that are inconsequential in the larger scope of James Gunn making the best trilogy of MCU films. People have been saying it. I don't know if I think I might agree. The best superhero trilogy of all time.
Maybe. Yeah.
But yeah, Tucker, I'm gonna give this thing, I don't fucking know, 9.7 out of 10. Let's say that.
Yeah. I'm gonna go 9.3 out of 10. I fucking love this movie. I walked out of that movie theater and I remember multiple times throughout the film being like, this could be a 5-star for me. And I'm like, I can't believe they're doing this as well as they are. And I think the reason that it surprised me so much and why I'm really like proud to like this movie is that there are just so many interesting choices that like feel like James Gunn, like this is a super distinct vision from him in terms of the emotional payoff of his characters and the comedic styling and creative visuals that he's been like sort of working on over the course of his movies. I think that his best work, both in terms of character writing and visual creativity, is in his two most recent movies, The Suicide Squad and Guardians 3. And I'm so excited to see where he goes next with even crazier worlds and delving into DC and being able to be the one that's like organizing all of these shows and in these movies and stuff. I think this movie works so well because it's really hyper focused. And you and I kind of disagreed with this last night, but I just kind of want to talk about the fact that this movie is like on one track. There's not some external fucking force that's coming in that's like a B-tier
that's
plot
what people
line.
have always liked about the Guardians movies is that they're not like intrinsically linked to the rest of the MCU.
Yeah, there's no Easter eggs.
I'm sure there are Easter eggs, but there's no like, how will this impact the Avengers and stuff like that? There's nothing that we don't get like a blip mention or anything of that nature. And I think it works to the film's benefit. What we have here is the three Guardians films are self-contained but still fit nicely into the larger MCU. That's what makes them the best trilogy. And if I may, end on a personal note for me, because as I mentioned,
sure,
the first Guardians of the Galaxy is a film that I hold very near and dear to my heart. I love Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and I love this film. And again, I didn't know how to feel about it the first time that I walked out of it. There's never been a film that made me feel like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Especially the first time I watched it. It was like a distraction for me all day today, and I had to go see it again to understand it. I keep questioning like why I needed that. I think it is, you know, if I can use an analogy from the film, which is why I think it's so powerful, is the Guardians movies were kind of a lily pad for me, maybe. Like, I didn't know, I didn't want to let these characters go. I didn't know what I wanted from them, knowing that they were going to leave.
Sure.
But it's time for me to strike out on my own, you know, Tucker.
Sure, and watch more MCU
I don't
movies.
know. I don't really know what I'm saying here, but I think there is something about like having to close out the characters in the trilogy of movies that like got me started on this crazy wacky journey we call watching movies.
Yep.
But who knows? Maybe we'll get a movie with the new Guardians team, and who knows where Star-Lord will pop up again, because we've been told he will. So, you know.
Yeah. Well, we weren't told that any of the other ones would.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
We will see.
The closest thing I can see is like that team, and also like showing up.
It's not
going to
be
the Avengers
James
movies.
Gunn, because he's busy for the rest of his maybe the rest of his life. We'll see how things pan out. But I mean that seems to be the common refrain here, Tucker. We'll see how things pan out with the things going into the future. But we'll be back here to talk about all sorts of new movies. There's some lower tier releases coming next week, and then we're into Fast X and Little Mermaid, and we're hot to trot in the summer movie season. Baby, we'll hear for all of it. Go watch our top 10 prediction for what we think the top 10 domestic finishers are going to be for this summer. It's a really fun video, really fun discussion. Go watch it.
Good plug. 90
Absolutely, I think it's the best time to do it. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.